Thank you very much for that introduction, Derek, and thank you for having me here this morning. Most importantly, actually, thank you for giving me a full night's sleep last night. I had twins 17 or so months ago, and this is my first night away from them. It was great. So if you want to invite me back next week, more than happy to come. It's lovely. They've all survived, apparently. Right, let me just... Right. Oh, you see, look, we've got problems with going. That's it. Right. I thought I would make my title to fit with the theme of this morning. So we're talking about educational technology, but really we're talking about change. And how you can make waves within your institution, but also keep afloat at the same time. And really what I'm going to talk to you about is some ideas around sustainability of some of the innovations and implementations that you're talking about. There's no such thing as a free keynote, I would say, in the sense that I'm going to talk for some of it, but you're going to do some work as well. So on your tables there should be some post-it notes. A little bit wide, there might be not quite enough, but I'm sure we've got a few things that we're going to do this morning. So some post-it notes that I'm going to use. There's also some postcards, which what you're going to do with those we'll find out later on. And it's always good to try something new, I think, when you're giving a keynote to 200 people. So I also thought we'd have a play with something called Poll Everywhere, which you may have used as well. And of course, nothing will go wrong. It'll all go perfectly well. So, Derek gave you a little bit of introduction about me, and you always want a nice gratuitous picture of my team having fun on the London Eye when we had an away day a couple of years ago. My remit at City is around learning development, educational technologies, and we work across the university embedding change. Really, and trying to manage that change, being what I call the emotional intelligence of the organisation and the shoulder to cry on for a lot of people that come into the office. Please, how can we do this? And we spend a lot of time giving out coffee and cake, depending on, towards the end of the day, wine and chocolate, that kind of thing. We've been involved in quite a lot of big educational change projects across the university that I'll talk about this morning as well in some of the examples that I'm going to give you, particularly around curriculum design and the introduction of new technologies. So, what are we going to do this morning? So, what I wanted to look at was 4 ways in particular in which you can promote educational change within your institutions and get you talking to each other on your tables as well. Give you some ideas about how to put these into practice, because it's all very well having someone like me stand up and go, you should be doing this, you could do this, you could do this, but actually give you some tangible ways in which you could work with those within your own organisation. And I'm always really keen as well to hear from people about what they've been doing and ideas that they have as well. And there will be the opportunity for you to ask some questions should you wish, or I'll be around as well this morning, so if you want to catch me later, you can do that. So I would say, then, that introducing change into an organisation is really as easy as A, B, C, and D. So, well, kind of. But at least if you can start with this part, it's somewhere where you can get a foundation to begin with. So firstly, it's about associating. So associating with other things that are going on within your organisations. Banning the T word, I would say. Don't talk about technology. Talk about the changes that you're going to do. Creating, it's all about creating new things, creating enthusiasms, creating a new culture, creating new projects, creating new ideas. And the last one, dreaming. We shouldn't be afraid to dream. Dream about the future, think about where we're going, some of the ideas about where we're going forward. I like Derek's know your territory. Think about where you're going in relation to that as well. So starting off then with associating, and the idea as well behind the kind of the 3, the A, the B and the C, is some of you will be familiar with change management literature, which talks about how you can keep, when you're introducing a change into an organisation, you keep some of the new things, you look at what you're going to keep, so that's associating with new initiatives, you look at what you're going to drop, what you're going to move away from, what you're going to ban in effect, and what you're going to create as new. And this is picking up on some of those same ideas about how we can move forward through associating with other things that are going on. This was something that I hadn't really thought about in relation to change. I'd always been quite reluctant to talk about projects in relation to educational technology, because I always felt that if we talked about projects, then it kind of made out that when the project had finished, everyone would go back to what they were doing before and nothing would really change. And really what I was saying, well, if you're starting in you're introducing something new into the organisation, and this was particularly when we started working with virtual learning environments at City about 10, 12 years ago, if you're starting that, it's not a project that's going to go away at the end of a year. It will actually change what people are doing. So it's more about a cultural change, a shift in the direction of the university. But this idea about associating what we're already doing came back to me very strongly a few years ago when we had a Jisc funded project on curriculum design. We were very excited about it. It was a big 4-year project, great. We thought we'd be able to do loads of things across the university, and it was all about looking at a core curriculum. Well, about 6 months into the project, our Vice-Chancellor left, literally overnight, who was one of the key kind of advocates of the project. And we suddenly realised that the shift of the university was going to go through a lot of flux, and people had change fatigue. They weren't going to deal with a big new shiny project coming in, lots of kind of balloons, and saying, great, we're going to be doing this initiative. So what we had to do is look at what was already happening around the university and piggyback on those activities and kind of do it slightly underneath the radar, introduce the change. And actually that had much more success. So we were looking at curriculum design. People didn't really talk about curriculum design, curriculum development before we started the project. At the end of the 4-year period, you could hear people talking about that. They had a sense of what was happening. And that's because we looked at what was already going on in the university. So we had a large-scale review of undergraduate education going on, and when we started talking to people in those conversations, we said, oh, have you thought about curriculum design? We've got some tools that could help you. We've got some resources here. So they weren't feeling like it was something else that they were taking on in relation to their existing workload. And this is something I think that's really important when you're working in your own organisation. Organisations, particularly education organisations, I think, love new projects, love creating like big institutional strategies, big things that are happening, and create a whole momentum around it. And if you're not careful, you can find that you've got initiatives popping up all over the place. So look at what's happening and look at where you can bring in your projects into that project. So student satisfaction is always a big area. We can't move at City at the moment without talking about the student experience. So how is your doing relates to what's happening with the student experience. I'm always very kind of sceptical about the use of committee structures because I spend a lot of time in committees reading paperwork like this and think, really, does anything change? But actually what I've learned is that if you start to use things like existing structures, like committee structures, things that are already happening, to bring through information about your changes, to talk to people in those structures, then again you can get more buy-in for what you're doing. So be quite savvy about looking at organisational structures that already exist that you can tie into as well. And think about events that are already happening. Think about some of the bedrocks that in your institution that you can bring in your ideas in, that you can use to just pitch what you're doing and to raise the profile of your activities. Okay, so I've started talking. I shall stop for a few minutes and give you your first pause. So what I'd like you to do is think of any changes or any new technologies or any projects that you're involved in within your own organisations. And then think about 1 or 2 events that you could piggyback on in order to raise the profile of what you're doing. I'd like you to jot those down on a post-it, and then I'd like you to discuss those in your table. And what you can do as well, and if you're watching this online, is this is going to be playing around with our poll everywhere, is I've set up a poll on Poll Everywhere, and you can either text or tweet. If you tweet that number and your message, it will hopefully, by magic, appear on the Poll Everywhere, and we'll have a look at that screen in just a minute. Okay, and I'm going to give you 5 minutes to do that. Okay, off you go. Okay, I'm going to give you 2 more minutes, and if you could nominate someone to choose your top answers to tweet, or you can put them on post-it notes and pop them on the walls, and then we'll create a bit of a post-it note wall. We've got some lovely post-it notes as well, so it'd be nice to have them all up on the walls. Okay, there's a few responses coming through. It is a space, so it's at poll space 88117, so we'll come back to that in a little bit. No one's been brave enough to stick any post-its on the wall yet. Next time, we'll do it. Okay, so there's some good ideas coming through there as well about using existing committee structures, as I said, looking at conferences, looking at working groups that are already happening. Okay, so, oops. So you've associated with things that are already going on. Then what are you going to do? Well, I would say the next thing is very, very clear about that you're not talking about technology, about how your implementation or initiative will actually benefit the wider issues that your institution are facing. Now, when we were doing our strategic learning environment initiative at City a couple of years ago, which was basically around bringing in one virtual learning environment and looking at the existing use of educational technology across the institution, creating a new vision around it, and then a new approach for the way that we wanted to look at educational technology and bringing in a new VLE to support that. We decided it wasn't about technology at all. It's not because there's nothing wrong with technology, but if we went around talking about the technology all the time, one, we would get people attached to the wrong things. They'd be going, oh, this new tool is great and shiny and I can use that. They wouldn't really be thinking about what it was going to change. And we wouldn't really be creating the imperative within the organisation and the sense of urgency that we needed to get people engaged in the change. So what we did is instead we talked about issues around student satisfaction. We sat down with academic staff and talked to them about some of the problems that they might be having in relation to perhaps teaching large groups, about issues around assessment, about engaging students, about retention, and then looked at how we could bring in the appropriate technologies in order to support that. We also had a few other words that we banned as well, like, well, I banned, but things like migration. We didn't want to talk about migration from one system to another. We wanted to talk about a new start, and actually about people creating new within the new system. And we looked at very much about having just like one parameter around the project that was non-negotiable, and then the other things that schools and individuals could work to in relation to about how they adopted the new solutions that we were proposing. And one of the things that was very strong in relation to this is that we didn't talk about technology in the vision that we created. So this is a little snapshot of the vision that we talked about, and it was more about how we were going to enhance the learning experience, and we talked to academic staff and other staff in the organisation about what functionality they wanted in order to support some of the key aspects that they had. So curriculum design was a big issue at City at the time. Assessment and feedback is always a challenge in relation to the kind of timeliness of students' feedback, the sorts of assessments we were able to set them, how we were managing our research and learning assets, so the fact that we've got something like 30 study skills modules across the university, how we were actually bringing those together, how we were sharing resources between them. And one thing at City that's another big challenge is around the communication and collaboration with our students. We have 50% roughly postgraduate students and 50% overseas students, and we're very much what they call a kind of commuter university. So students come in for their classes and then they leave. Again, they don't really stay around on campus. It's not a campus-based institution in that sense. So how could we communicate with those students? How could we stop them coming on a train at 7:30, 8:30 in the morning to London at a very expensive time when it's very busy, and then only to get to campus and find that their class had been cancelled? How could we talk to them in a more timely and responsive manner? And we spent a long time working through with staff in the organisation this vision of where we wanted to go. Whether we'll actually achieve it or get there wasn't really the point. It was more about bringing people together to have this conversation around that wasn't about educational technologies. One of the other things about it was that the strategic learning environment got shortened to SLE all the time, and people managed to kind of take that out with them in the organisation. They weren't always clear necessarily that what the SLE stood for, and at first I thought, oh no, this is awful. So one of our vice-chancellors, we had many vice-chancellors in a short period of time, so one of our vice-chancellors stood up and said, yes, and we're introducing this new student learning environment. And I was like, oh no, but it's the strategic learning environment, that's terrible, he's got the title wrong. And then I thought, well actually, does it really matter? The main thing is he stood up, he's talked about it, and he's talking about it, and he's talking about how exciting it's going to be, and he's bringing it in. And actually, he's owning it. He thinks it's about students. Well, it is about students. It's about everything that's going on in the university. So actually, he started to get a little bit more relaxed about the way that people were engaging with these things, and the fact that they were taking away the ideas and the concepts behind it and able to bring them into their own discourse and dialogue around it. Okay, so second pause for thought then. And we'll see if we get more responses up on the poll everywhere this time. So what I'd like you to do is think about the non-technological problems in your organisation that your implementations, that your projects or your initiatives would address, and deal with two of those, and then I'd like you to put them again on post-its. And you can start popping post-its on the walls. I did have some paper to put up as well, but we decided we'd just put them on the walls. It would be a bit more radical, and then you can look at them throughout the day. Okay, so I'll give you 5 to 10 minutes for that as well. So non-technological problems. Right, okay. Everyone got chatting eventually. I'm just saying it's quite an interesting experiment to see whether people actually prefer Post-its to poll everywhere. No one can be bothered now with Post-its. Poor Post-its. That everyone just likes sitting there doing this instead, but it works quite well. Okay, so some of the responses where you can see them that are coming up are around looking at showcases, looking at communication skills, looking at, there we go, ways in which we contact Facebook, students through Facebook, things around employability, got sharing, collaboration, creativity, I like that one, and looking at kind of issues where there's problems around communication, such as induction. We also got some quite nice comments back on the previous poll. If I could get there. Go back. Yeah, in terms of, some of them came in a little bit later after I was talking, in terms of some of the initiatives. There was one that I liked about look at initiatives that are already causing ructions, waves, making an impact in your organisation, and see how you can piggyback on those as well. And I thought that was a really good one. So look at some, perhaps, some issues that are quite controversial. There is one technique, it's slightly Machiavellian, is that something gets decided on quite often institutional level. We had this at City in that our new and current Vice-Chancellor came in and said, I want a 3-week turnaround time on all coursework. So that's from when it's submitted to when the feedback goes back to the students, including second marking moderation. No question, there's no negotiation on this, that's what we're all doing. So obviously that was quite a challenge for some areas. So we could go in and say, well, that's really awful that you've got this terrible decision that's been forced on you, but how about using online assessment? Or in fact, why not change your assessment from 5,000 word essays into something that's more interesting, like peer assessment, and then you could actually be much quicker to mark that and get the feedback back to the students. So sometimes some of these big institutional diktats that can be quite problematic can be real opportunities to get in and make a change and do the sort of hand-holding, shoulder to cry on, and then take that further into actually getting people to engage with what you're doing. And needless to say, actually at City, uptake of online submission particularly has just gone through the roof because of that 3-week turnaround. Okay, and there's some other things here around looking at tools and other things that people looked at in relation to the first one. But I'll keep this up so you can see it later. Right, okay, so we've done A and B, and now we're on to C. So the third part of this is looking at creating. So I talked about often we suffer from initiative overload within an organisation, but actually when you're involved in one of these change projects, looking at how you can create people to advocate the change for you is really, really important, even if they don't do it in necessarily the exact way that you might like if you're in your kind of control freak mentality that I sometimes have. But actually if they're talking about the initiative, they're getting out and they're reaching parts of the organisation that you don't normally get to, that's really, really important. One of the things that I frequently struggle with is how do I get to the people that don't engage because they don't engage, so I don't know how to get to them. And then you're kind of caught in that constant loop. You see the same faces all the time, lovely faces, but it's always the same people. So creating advocates and champions, so the kind of the heroes that you're working with can be really important, but choose wisely. So I used to work with a colleague who was involved in online distance learning courses quite a few years ago now when I arrived at City, and he was great and he was massively dedicated to this programme. He produced reams and reams of lecture notes online, but the problem was when you took him out to talk to people, he'd say, oh well, I'm doing this and I'm doing this on a Sunday and I do this on a Friday night and I'm doing this in the week, and yeah, it was really awful the other morning because at 4 o'clock in the morning someone was posted on the virtual learning environment, and you could see staff like, no, this is awful, I'm going nowhere near this technology, it's going to eat my entire life, I'm not having anything to do with it. So you need to look at your champions, but choose them carefully and make sure they're people that you can take out with you into the organisation, that will talk on your behalf, that not necessarily some of the people that you might think are the natural champions. And actually some of those skeptics, if you can engage them, are some of the best people to talk about what you're doing, because they will be very, very honest as well. Some of the things at City we've done, we've had various champion schemes over the years, and I think the other thing about this is that it's often the tendency is to think, well, this has to involve money or time. It doesn't always have to. Again, if you're using some of the other techniques that we talked about engaging with things that are already happening, involving some of people's pinch points, problems that they're experiencing in the organisation, it doesn't necessarily have to involve loads of time, and it certainly doesn't have to involve money, unless it's money to buy things like cake, because I always think cake's really important when you're talking to people. But sometimes very small things can make a massive difference. So think quite creative about how you can engage staff. Something that we did as well at City was we had launched a Student Voice Awards scheme to reward people who were doing excellent teaching and learning and support for students. But what we did is we handed it completely over to the students who wanted to run it. They ran the whole scheme themselves. It's been going for about 4 or 5 years now. And we have usually something like 250, 300 nominations from students across the university. We keep it very simple. There's some criteria. It doesn't matter if you're supervising 1 PhD student or 200 first-year undergraduates. You are still both eligible to be nominated for a Student Voice Award. And what we also do is we write to everybody that gets nominated, and then we have a bit of a kind of, we have a sort of blind award ceremony in the sense that only the people that know they've won have been told that they've won, and everyone else just gets invited. And we write to everyone and we give them citations from the nominations. And that very small thing of just writing people a letter saying you were nominated for a Student Voice Award and this is what your students said about you is incredibly powerful. The letters that I've had back from people said, I was going through quite a bad time, then I got this letter and it's really inspired me to keep going and making this change, even if they don't win the award. So sometimes those, as I say, those very small things and keeping it simple can make a massive difference in terms of that culture of change that you're trying to introduce, and kind of creating that celebration of what people are doing and that they feel valued in the work that they're doing. Right, so it's over to you again. This is the second to last one, but the last one's quite easy. What I'd like you to do is think about what resources that you have at your disposal that you could create advocates and champions. Being quite creative here, it doesn't have to involve money, and what kind of small things that you could do, very simple things to reward people. You can write it on post-its and put it on the wall, but no one's doing that, or post-its. Or you could just do it on the poll, anywhere, everywhere. Okay, and I'll give you about 5 minutes for that. A couple of points that people raised then, which I just wanted to come back to because I just thought they were quite interesting. So one was around using students to champion, reminded me of something that happened when we were talking to students as part of our whole VLE evaluation, and we were talking to students a lot about different systems because we were thinking a lot about whether we should go be with Blackboard or Moodle or whatever, and the students said, well, we don't really care, we just want somewhere where we can get our access to materials, we can communicate with our lecturers, and it felt like what I thought was the kind of the coffee shop on campus scenario, in that if you're like coffee, like I do, I tend to go to quite nice coffee shops and buy like more expensive coffee. But when I'm on campus, I'll probably just use the coffee shop that's nearest because it's easy and I'm on campus. It's the same with the students. They may go off all over the place in London when they're working, but when they're on campus, they'll just use what's available to them and what's easy. And I think we spend a lot of time thinking about the different technologies and what students want and whether we should be involved in Facebook and whether we should be doing assessment via Twitter and all this kind of thing, and what students are using in their personal lives and adapting into that. But we've got to remember that when they come into the university environment, actually, quite often they will be quite happy using some of the tools that we will use because it's easy and it's convenient for them and all their materials are there online. And I think that's very, very important to remember that. Often we think that we should be involved in their space. Actually, they're coming into our collaborative space, and there are often very good reasons for them as to why they want to engage with some of our institutional systems. That's not all the time, but some of the time. And I think that sometimes we spend a lot of time thinking about the things that don't actually matter to students. And it's really getting out there and listening to them and hearing what they're saying. And I think that using students to champion is a very important part of that. Go out there, listen to what they're really saying. They're not bothered about which system they're using. They're bothered about the way in which we use it. And then related to that is around the student-led and how we support that. There are lots of ways that we can really bring students into meaningful participation. There's some work going on about this nationally at the moment, and there's this whole kind of ladder of engagement that some of you may have seen about engaging students more than just having one or two of them sitting on various committees, but actually working in partnership together. And we've experimented with various things at City about having student and academic staff working together on projects, working in partnership so that the students are actually doing, some of the research work in relation to that, and really engaging them so that we are able to listen and build on what they're actually telling us and saying to us. Anyway, there's some other great answers coming in there as well, which you can have a look at later. So, lastly then, so we've done our ABC, and we're now up to D, and this is where I'd like us to start dreaming. So I think it's very easy to get involved in the day-to-day, but actually we are change agents. We are working in a very fast-moving, very rapidly developing area, and sometimes you can get very bogged down in some of the day-to-day things and really lose sight of what we're trying to do. So I'd encourage you to take the time out to have some dreams and to start dreaming about the future. If you start imagining the future and start to think about how things could look 5, 10, 15, even 20 years' time, then we can start to feel that we own that future a bit more and understand some of the consequences of the decisions we make today. What I wouldn't suggest, there's a recent report out at the moment that was sponsored by Pearson, which talks about the universities of the future and talks a lot about MOOCs, and it's kind of quite bleak. And that's my other concern, is that sometimes, and Derek gestured to this in his opening presentation, is sometimes when we're talking about the changes that are happening in education, and we're talking about the advent of new technologies, it's all very bleak, very depressing. And so we're all going to be closed down, there's going to be no one there, and everyone's going to be learning online in little boxes. Actually, I think that there's a whole range of futures available to us, and I think if we start to engage in some of that scenario planning and dreaming, we can feel much more positive about some of the futures that are going to happen. And of course, as we all know, best laid plans and all that, what will happen won't quite be about the way that any of us imagine now, but there'll be various things coming together across a whole range of different futures. So we've done some work at City, I've done some work around scenario planning, and I've created a set of scenarios with staff to see how they felt about some of the futures. We were looking at a kind of 15-year time span, which is kind of, I can barely think beyond about next week currently most of the time. So actually it's quite nice to stand back and think about where we could be going. And there were 6 scenarios that we looked at. So one was around universities that are entirely based on credit. So yes, of course we have a credit transfer system now, but really, did we really talk about that? So we talked about how students could pick a mix. It was very, very flexible, totally non-linear study programs, and a lot transferable, and particularly transferable, I thought, between different sectors of education as well, and thinking about the whole lifelong learning agenda. But of course, if you talk about this to a lot of traditional academics within a university environment, they'll say, yes, but it makes it very incoherent. You can't study English literature unless you're studying it in a 3-year pattern and everybody takes the same program. So credit courses, do we have a future where really we don't have so much association perhaps with one university or one education provider, but with a whole range of providers, and we just pick credit up as we go through our professional lives? Virtual. Of course, everyone's talking a lot at the moment, and it's really interesting being on maternity leave and coming back. One of the things I've really noticed is the whole increase in MOOCs. You can't go anywhere at the moment without somebody mentioning MOOCs. And there's a lot of debate, as I'm sure you're aware, about them, which we won't go into now. But what is interesting is that they're engaging some senior management within education institutions in this sort of dialogue around this in a way that they perhaps weren't engaged before. And so that is quite interesting in terms of how we're actually looking at educational change and how technology is impacting on curriculum and delivery. So obviously, if we're thinking about virtual universities, virtual education provision, will everything be online? It's incredibly flexible. We can do it whenever we want to. And potentially, there is an argument that it's very student-driven, because obviously, if people are rolling on courses, they want to do it, and the students can determine how they learn. But it's quite isolating, and any of you, if you've taken an online course, and if you're working in this area, probably most of you will have done, I mean, when I took my online course, I was just horrified at what a bad student I was and how I left everything to the last minute. I could never get motivated to go in until I actually started to block time out in my diary as if it was a formal face-to-face course. And that was the only way that I found that I could actually have the time to engage in the materials. And one of the problems with a lot of the MOOCs, and of course with the high dropout rates, is that students aren't able to give themselves the time to do it. They are trying to squeeze it in with everything else. So it really is that a sustainable model. And then we've got what I call the ostrich model, which is really, particularly some institutions, depending on their reputation, also just ignore any of the changes that are happening to them and just bury their head in the sand and just keep going with the 3-year traditional model, looking mainly at 18-year-old school leavers coming in. But is this really sustainable? And I think even your kind of top-notch organisations and higher education providers particularly will have to start to change. And perhaps actually they're the ones that will go back to much more of this kind of smaller group learning, and it's some of the other institutions that have started with the very large-scale undergraduate programs that will be needing to think about how they change their models and how we create a more sustainable approach. But will that still be around in 15 years' time? Probably, to some extent. And then there's work-based learning. There's been a lot of interest, and we get this at City because we're quite professional and vocational in what we do, around working much more closely with employers. And I was at an event fairly recently where they had someone from HP who was saying, well, the problem is we're just not getting the graduates that we need coming out of universities, and therefore we need to be in the universities determining the curriculum so that we can make sure that we get the students that we want. Now that's quite a controversial point, particularly with universities and education providers having less money. Do we want HP and other providers sponsoring courses in our institutions? Well, yes, because it brings in money, it brings in dialogue, it makes them more appropriate, but does that mean that it limits the aspirations of the students? Can they only then go and work for one provider? What does it mean about autonomy and integrity of the curriculum? What if there's a conflict between what we want to teach as educators and what they think the curriculum should be doing? Will it still be relevant and timely? So there's some big issues there about how we work with employers, how we get them contributing to the curriculum, and how it's developed and shaped through it. And I think we'll see much more of this growing in terms of the privately funded courses and the way that employers are actually sponsoring education. It's always been there, I think, anyway, but it's just actually coming much more to the fore now. And then there's an argument as well in some areas that some universities and some education providers will go down a much more pedagogic route. So already in Australia, they've talked about the University of Melbourne model you might have heard about, where they looked at a very particular pedagogic model of how they should run their degree programs, and that's what they rolled out across the university. So it was, instead of having much more specialist, it was much more general, and students specialise later. So there's a market here perhaps for some universities to really put teaching and learning at the forefront and say that we are teaching in a very particular way. Perhaps it might be group-based, perhaps it might be around placements, and this becomes their USP, for want of a better word, and this is where they work with academics to deliver that curriculum model. Does it improve quality? Debatable. Will it mean that actually they won't be able to have the diversity of courses? Would it lead to more generalisation? Is it perhaps limited in scope? Some very interesting questions around this, but it's certainly something, as the institutions try and differentiate more, that perhaps this is something that we will see happening. And then, of course, we've got the global university, and again, this has come up a lot in the discussion around MOOCs, but there's talk about, well, will universities open campuses in other countries, and then you're just still given that quality of education. Now, again, this has been around for a while in terms of the UK providers opening up in the Middle East and the Far East and opening up campuses out there, but it's been quite fraught with problems in various areas. But actually, and again, you see it even in within the UK, in the fact that there are Scottish universities opening up campuses in London, and probably vice versa. So, you know, there's this thing around perhaps what does it mean to have a global education? There's a lot of talk about global citizenships. We should be encouraging our students to have this global outlook. Will it mean that they'll get a better, broader degree program because they're actually engaging with a number of different qualities? But how does it lead to the uniqueness of what we deliver as education providers, and how does it fit with perhaps a lifelong learning agenda? Does it fit with that more appropriately, or is it more problematic? Does it lead to kind of just a very general education, or does it mean that actually students have a broader skill set? Does it make them more able to work within a global workplace, or does it mean that actually that we've just got a lot of people coming out with very similar qualifications, there's no differentiation between them? And is it really, are you really taking a degree from Harvard if you're taking it in London or Edinburgh, or is it really actually just a very kind of weaker version of that? So again, that's a model that perhaps I'm sure we'll see will come in to a greater or lesser degree. So what I'd like you to do for your last, this is your last exercise, is vote. You have 3 votes, and I'd like you to vote on which model you think is most likely, which scenario is most likely to happen in relation to those 6 scenarios. Okay, have you all voted? Unsurprisingly, the winner was the virtual university, which I think, given the interest in MOOCs and some of the other, and the audience here as well, I'm not surprised. But also the credit scenario as well, quite popular there as well, which I think is quite interesting. And of course, you know, these are quite extreme scenarios. There's probably more likely to be a meld of things happening together, but you can see that virtual and credit working quite nicely together in students picking up courses and credit for courses that they take online. And that already happens in some places, already, that students can take additional credits online and then use that, particularly in the States, and then use that against for their degree. Suddenly there at the end, pedagogical, rushing up there in the States to beat global and workplace. So there you go. Okay. And if you're interested in those scenarios, I have got them written out in longer form that you can read if you would like. I can just tweet me or email me and I can send them over to you. Okay, so we're at the end. So just remember your A, B, C and D. Thinking about associating what you do with existing initiatives that are happening in your organisation. Think about banning the use of technology, ban the T word. Create new things, create champions, create people to talk for you, to take out your innovation, or bring in people from outside sometimes. There's always that lovely thing where you can bang away at something and you can talk about everybody within your institution about something and they all nod, but no one does anything. And then you bring someone in from outside and they say exactly the same things and everyone goes, yes, that's it, that's amazing. Oh look, there's some post-it notes on the wall over there as well, I'm so happy. It's great, just at the end. Brilliant. And lastly, dream. Don't forget to dream. Think about the futures. Engage in some of the debates that are happening. But try and be positive about it. You know, it's exciting, the area that we work in. Don't be drawn into that terrible, it's all gloom and doom scenario planning that you often see. Think about the future in an exciting way and how we can get to it and what we're creating. Now, I know that you've all been desperate to know why you've got postcards on your table as well. Some of you have got James Bond. Some of you have got Vogue. What I'd like you to think about is one thing that you're going to do differently after today. And I'd like you to make a commitment. I want you to send a postcard to yourself. So what I'd like you to do is just take a couple of minutes. I know you haven't gone through the whole day yet, but thinking about some of the discussions that we've had this morning, both in my session and Derek's session, I'd like you to write your commitment on one side of the postcard. I'd like you to write your name and address on the other side of the postcard. Leave them on the table and I will come and take them from you and I will post them back to you in 6 months' time. That's my commitment to you. So what are you going to do differently after today? I mean, I'm assuming that one thing you'll do differently will be educational, technology, work-related, but it doesn't have to be, I guess. You know, it might be that you'll have hot buns for breakfast every Friday morning or something. Okay, if you've done that, I'd like to thank you very much for your engagement this morning and for helping me try out Poll Everywhere, which I haven't done before, but it was good. I like it. 3M are going to be worried now, I think, because my post-it note consumption is going to go down drastically. And I think we've got time for some questions. Yeah? We've got a couple of minutes for any questions if anybody's got anything or anything they'd like to share. Feel free to stick your hand up, wave something in the air. Everyone's just thinking about coffee now. Yes. 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 Yeah. Oh, I'd love to. And that means I get another full night's sleep as well, doesn't it? So, brilliant. Yeah, I mean, I'd say yes and no. I mean, they were written, to be honest, within an HE environment. But actually, I think that there are a lot of things that they could apply to further education and vice versa. And actually, I would love to work with somebody from FE, there's a plea, to work through them to make them more appropriate for both sectors. I think that could be really interesting. Because I think in the future there'll be less differentiation, actually, between the different sectors. And particularly if you're thinking about something like credit-based or workplace learning, that may take place in either sector, because you may be building up credits over time, or the virtual, actually. I mean, any of them apply to that. So it would be lovely to do that. So there's an offer. If anybody would like to come and work with me on that, I'd be more than happy to. And then I can come back and get another full night's sleep next year. Great. So it's a winner on all counts. Other questions? Yes. Yeah. Yeah, I think it's an open invitation either way. Yeah. Any other questions? No, you all want your coffee now. Well, you've worked very hard. So thank you again. And you've got my email address and Twitter, and do get in touch if you have any thoughts at a later point. So thank you.
It's my job to say thank you and take us on to the next bit of the agenda. And having done A to D, I just wanted to do the letter E very briefly. I'm just back from almost 2 weeks in Brussels doing evaluations of technology-enhanced learning projects. And the 3 words which are now burned into my soul are XMOOC, CMOOC, and flipped classroom. That's clearly where everything is happening throughout Europe, not just in sectors in the UK. That's very much the buzzword stuff. The second point that came up was external, the importance not just of having external people come in. I've done this throughout my career 30 or 40 times, gone into institutions and told them what the relevant staff knew already, but because you come from outside, it somehow sounds more impressive. But there's another way of doing that, which we managed in Strathclyde once when we were first introducing laptops, which was to send the Vice-Chancellor to the United States. We'd spend 1.5 years in those days saying we want to bring in laptops, we want to bring in no, you can't do it, you can't do it. Vice-Chancellor went to Harvard, discovered that's what they're doing there, and he came back and said, guys, I've just had this great idea. Is that right? So the external can work both ways. The other point that was mentioned was experience. There's a lot of experience in all sectors of the way we can do things, and sharing that experience, I think, is really valuable. And the last word, Susannah, you stole my final line, which was engagement. On 2 lines, thank you, first of all, for engaging so much with us. It's wonderful sitting down here with the organisers and hearing that buzz of activity that's been going around the room for the last hour while you all became engaged with what was happening during the talk. That's really great, not just to have people sitting for an hour listening to what they're being told and tablets of stone handed down. So that approach, I think, was absolutely fabulous. So please join with me in thanking Susannah for really great stuff and great engagement. Thank you.